Are you all watching what is going on in Texas as far as the pro-life versus the pro-choice people goes? The law is quite clear. Anti-abortion doctor testifies in support of the Texas ban. On the second day of the hearing over the lawsuit filed against the state of Texas, an anti-abortion doctor who practices in the state testified Thursday in support of the ban, stating the law is clear and that if doctors believe they cannot provide proper care, it's because they misunderstand the law. Meanwhile, two physicians who practice medicine outside the state testified for the plaintiffs, arguing that the Texas abortion laws are confusing and would make it difficult to provide necessary care to patients. They were joined by a physician in Texas who was pregnant herself and delivered an emotional testimony about having to go out of the state to get an abortion. The hearing is part of an ongoing lawsuit filed by the Center for Reproductive Rights on behalf of 15 women in the state of Texas, alleging that the state's abortion laws put their lives in jeopardy. Lawyers are asking the court to provide a remedy applied to patients whose life, health, and fertility is at risk from an emergent medical condition. Basically, a lot of these women are are in this lawsuit because the pregnancies weren't viable. But because of Texas's restrictive abortion bans, they were forced to continue to carry the fetuses, even though their lives were at risk, and the doctors wouldn't perform until the women were like about to die, basically. This woman right here in the middle, she is a practicing physician. She says, and for them, my only choice was to continue the pregnancy, putting my life at risk and my mental and emotional health at risk for a fetus that was never going to survive. So I had a lot of big feelings about that. Imagine the emotional state of these women knowing that these fetuses are not viable, but having to continue to carry them in your body because the state of Texas says so. Towards the bottom, Denard testified that her emotional recovery takes longer than her physical recovery and said that the grief of losing a child never really goes away. And the emotional turmoil that was put on by the state of Texas and these restrictive bans, it helped exacerbate that emotional dis-well-being, if that's even a word. Doctors are not acting because they are afraid of the consequences. So this statement, it's also pretty evident that the fact is that the consequences of those laws are severe personally to the physicians themselves. Understand that this is another reason why physicians will be leaving more red states. As more physicians leave, imagine how many women will be harmed overall, how many children will be harmed overall. I'm continuing the conversation about the Texas lawsuit over their abortion bans. Okay, this is where I'm starting. It's making it hard to determine when physicians can act and exercise in that good faith and clinical judgment, and that's clear based on the patient's understanding of their discussions with their physicians in their affidavits. Given that physicians in Texas are practicing under the abortion ban, where if they're prosecuted, they carry the risk of losing their license, their livelihood, and time in jail, they're going to practice the most conservatively as possible. It's hard to create a list that would delineate all the conditions that would meet a medical indication for abortion. I gave some examples above to give it a sense of how you might think about it, but creating an extensive list, I believe, would be an impossible task. So the woman that's pictured down below, last name Scott, she is one of the anti-abortion people. And she says the law is clear. The physicians just misunderstand the guidelines. And towards this middle sentence, this middle paragraph, it says they should have known they could intervene. They should not have waited until the women were on the verge of death and going into ICU to intervene. At some point, these people just simply need to be more hands off, but they won't do that because they are simply in the business of controlling women. And they do not see the foresight, they don't see what is coming down the pipe with doctors just walking away because they do not want to mishandle or misunderstand or misinterpret like they're doing right now. And like this woman is basically blaming them. Scott also argued that in situations where the fetus cannot be saved, she believes induction is more appropriate than performing a procedure such as the DNC, the dilation and curettage. a much more holistic way to progress through the grieving process than to dismember your child and not have a way to grieve. She added that palliative care and hospice care, including perinatal palliative care, should be provided. So she is still trying to keep hold of control and how these people handled, the doctors and the women handle things. Scott added that life-threatening complications often occur close to viability, which she said is around 22 weeks of gestation, and the child is able to survive. She said doctors can use their judgment in determining, yet she's also still trying to hold on to control of how they do things and what procedures they do. Okay, so in closing arguments, the plaintiff's attorneys argued that the bans are dehumanizing and are putting patients through torture, which they are, because they are making them live through these situations and there's not a lot of wiggle room. Y'all jump in and tell me what you think.
I've had to watch Twin A Isla deteriorate more and more every ultrasound. Sorry. I would have had to give birth to an identical version of my daughter without a skull and without a brain. And I would have had to hold her until she died.
It was an emotional day of testimony in Austin, Texas, where a lawsuit challenging the state's abortion ban was heard there. 13 women and an OBGYN who are the plaintiffs say that the law is too vague on what constitutes a medical emergency. Another plaintiff recalled the moment that she learned her pregnancy was not viable.
And I can see her pain in her eyes. And she told me that my daughter has been diagnosed with anencephaly, and that means that her skull and her brain is not fully developed, and that she was sorry. I didn't have any option. I was pregnant. She then called in a caseworker. Caseworker came in, and they handed me a paper that said funeral homes on top of it. She told me that I didn't have any options because there was a law that the Texas abortion law prohibited it. I wasn't able to get one. So I felt like I was abandoned.
That woman grew so distressed on the stand. You see her there. She started to vomit.